So what my lab does is tries to understand the disease. A lab like mine is what we're often referred to as a preclinical lab or a scientific lab, fundamental research. There's always different labels that are put to it. Basically, it means we're a lab that tries to understand the science of a disease and use that to identify how you can treat it. Because you've got to know what's going on before you can actually intervene and do something to improve it. So what my lab does is tries to understand the disease in the context of when does it start, where does it start, how does it progress, what are the key determinants that will dictate how severe the form of the disease is, because some people have, you take someone like Stephen Hawking, very famous person with MND, but who was essentially lived an almost normal lifespan, versus people who have, a month after diagnosis and everything in between. So trying to answer some of those fundamental questions is really key to us. And then what we want to do is then use that knowledge to then identify new treatments and therapies. And it's not simple. It's not a disease like, where you're going to be able to go to the GP and get the aspirin or something that will just sort all the problems. That's not what you're dealing with something like MND. But we've gone from having essentially nothing about 10, 15 years ago. And if I remember, Doddy came and sat right there, came to see me and had just been diagnosed and said, right, there's a few expletives, what are we going to do about this? Because this is, and he sat there, and when someone like that lays out to you what the paucity of treatment options are for him, it really, I knew it, but when you hear it from someone, it absolutely just hits you like a train. And so what we've just been doing is using money raised by Doddy and yourselves to try and understand the science, identify therapy targets, and the key intermediate between those two is clinical trials. So really what Doddy has facilitated with the foundation is to do the fundamental science and then to take that, and this is the key bit, to take it to clinical trial. Not to have everything happen in labs like mine and the clinical trials are completely separate, but you bring the two together. And so what we've identified in our lab is a key energy generating pathway. So all cells in the body need to make energy, but motor neurons, the cells that die in the disease, need it especially. And if they don't have sufficient energy supply, they are very, very vulnerable to that. And we think that's one of the reasons why they break down. So we've identified a target that we can hit with a drug that can essentially boost energy levels in motor neurons, to put it bluntly. And that drug is a repurposed drug. This is what's quite exciting. So this is a drug that's taken by many, many people around the world for high blood pressure. So it's very well known. The safety profile is very well known and established, and it costs 20p a tablet, not hundreds of thousands of pounds. So the idea is you can take it into clinical trials straight away. You don't need to do all the safety stuff first, which is normally a really time-consuming and costly part of any clinical trial. You can go straight to patients with it, and you can get them dosed up without needing a big pharma company to sponsor the trial, because they're normally hundreds of millions of pounds. Doddy has funded the entire trial that we're doing. So in collaboration with colleagues at Oxford, University of Oxford, we now have 50 patients who have been treated with the drug that we've identified, called terazosin or terazosin, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And they are now on trial, so they're receiving the drug, and we will kind of break the code of what's happened to them all early 2025. So that still seems like an awfully long time, but that is so quick in the normal timeline of drug development, it's almost unbelievable. We've taken it down from 10, 20 years to something closer to 3 to 5 years. Now, it will not be a cure. None of these things are a cure, but we have a hope that it will do a lot to protect the motor neurons, and what we really want is to improve the quality of life of patients with MND. And again, that's what Doddy was saying. It's actually, if you can allow me to brush my teeth for 2 years longer, I'm a happy man. And that's the reality. That's probably the interim goal. It's those treatments that will improve quality life, prolong life, but with a good quality of life. And then longer term, obviously, you want to then be doing even more and more to really halt the progress of the disease. So what we'll show you today really is the process you go through to identify that drug. How did we come up with this drug? How, you don't just pluck it out of thin air. You've got to try and have a rationale for it, and you've got to be able to justify to people that it's potentially going to work. You can never say it will or won't work. Every clinical trial is essentially an experiment, but can we trial it? And we managed to get, I think, a lot of evidence that it did look hopeful. So that's really what I'm going to get you to see in the lab, is how do you do that? How do you find these things? How do you study whether or not a drug is going to be useful? And that's really what my lab does. And Doddy, as I say, the foundation has funded us right from this initial discovery of the target through to now it going into patients. And if it's successful in the clinical trial, then it can very quickly become a cheap, easily deliverable, it's simply a tablet you take every morning, treatment hopefully that might have impact on patients with MND. So that's really kind of what we're going to show you today. That's the kind of approach we take. Colleagues from the team here, all with different expertise, backgrounds and skills, from geneticists, we've got veterinary neurologists, surgeons, pharmacologists, cell biologists, a whole mixture of skill sets and backgrounds. It's very much based on using model systems. So what I mean by model systems is it might be cells in a dish, it might be animals. And by animals I mean zebrafish. I don't know if you've come across these little fish, but they're tiny, tiny little fish that are, in the adult, look like a zebra, hence it's got stripes. But when they're really, really young, embryos essentially, they are transparent. So you can actually study, you can make the motor cells glow in them, and you can study how they grow out and how they break down in the disease. And you can then get the fish to basically swim in a tank of the drug and test whether it works or not. So you get away with all the problems of dosing and how do you make a pill and all these kind of things, and it's just tiny little fish. So we've got some of those in a microscope so you can have a look at those to get some idea of what goes on. I understand some people don't like the idea of animal experimentation. This is not like what you see down on, if you walk down Printer Street and there's people use horrendous, anti-vivisection stands. This is absolutely not what goes on in labs like this. It's incredibly controlled. It's small embryos, often things that are just tiny, but that is basically what you have to use to study the disease. So we'll show you those kind of things. Is everyone okay to see that kind of thing? I mean, there's nothing gruesome or horrible. It's simply just tiny little fish that are mounted on slides, so you can see that we study.
I think it's a huge journey we're all on, about learning about, because we're doing it because people we know, our neighbours, friends of parents. Let's just understand that other end of it, and I guess it's a solution we're looking for is to see the problems you guys are, the brain power and the collective sort of wisdom to pull together to unlock.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
I think Dolly's phrase, it's not incurable, just underfunded or under-researched. So the funding that we're helping to raise helps you to put energy and time into that. And 30 years ago, something in our village, we were talking about this on the way in, we were speaking to a primary school friend of mine, and we knew something in our village who had it, and nothing had changed in that 30 years. So Dolly's words really rung true to all of us in our team, and has done for a few years now.
Yeah, I mean, it's been criminally underfunded, criminally under-resourced, but all we can do is change that now and do things now. And we all wish we'd done it 50 years ago, but I think there is really, and I don't want to oversell it because I don't like promising false things, but I think there is now genuinely for the first time hope. There is genuinely hope that treatments are on the horizon, that they are going to be useful and powerful. And I remember Doddy saying to me, she said, look, I know it ain't going to help me, it's too late for me, but if I can help one person in 10, 20 years, 30 years time, then it's all been worthwhile.
What a long shadow to cast, eh?
And
that's a selfless sort of view, which is
what a legacy.
Yeah,
huge legacy. What a legacy. So,
are you okay if we ask really daft questions all through this?
Please,
we don't know any, not medical and
no. And so if we tell you anything that doesn't make sense, or you've got questions, and there's nothing that's kind of off the table. There's things that are useful for you to know about, you want to hear about, or you already know all about it and I'm boring you. Just tell us and we can.
This is just phenomenal. We've all been involved with the foundation raising money for a few years now, but actually to come here and find out where that money's going, just phenomenal. And already this is just fantastic.
So. And remember, it's people behind it. This is often what's missed, is that we're just like you. We're doing our job, and our job is to try and cure motor neurone disease. It just happens to be what we do. But I'm very lucky, and I won't tell them while they're in earshot, but basically any team, as you'll know from rugby, any team is only as good as the individuals that are in it, and how they come together and work as a team. They've got to be better than the sum of the parts. And I'm incredibly lucky. We have managed to recruit some of the best scientists really from around the world, and they are global. So Taiwan, Belgium, France, Germany, Australia, we had all in one lab working on this disease. And that's the secret to doing good science. And the only way you can do that is to have the funding. If you don't have the funding, these people won't come here and work on it. But the people that I'll introduce you to, they are exceptional. They really, really are. Often young people doing sort of, some of our PhD students earn under 20,000 a year. This is not well-paid people. This is people doing it really out of love rather than for some kind of, massive remuneration or anything. And they are absolutely as committed as you can imagine. So the fact that you're coming here to talk to them is huge for them. You might think it's the other way around. It's not for them. So I'm the one that gets to go out and talk to people a lot. They have to work in the lab, but they're the ones that are making the discoveries, not me. I get to manage it, I get to oversee it, but they're the folks that have the week in, week out, it's not worked again, it's not worked again. And they have to keep going and picking themselves up and doing the experiment again and trying again, and they are amazing. So the fact that you're willing to come and talk to them, hear their stories, hear what they do, is huge for them, motivating them as well, that they realise that the work they do is relevant and that people care about it and that people want to know about it. For a 20, 25-year-old person who's setting out in their scientific career, it's game-changing as well. So, I'm really grateful for you taking the time to come, because it makes my job very easy, because they
made us all feel very humble, but thank you.
So, should we wander over the way? We could go outside, but it's cold. So I can take you the tradesman's route through the back, if that's all right. En route, there's actually our famous elephant skeleton. So in anatomy in Edinburgh is very famous for having 2 elephant skeletons, which have been with us for a couple of hundred years. And every photograph of anatomy has people in front of the elephant skeletons.
Is that the must-do photograph we've got to do?
It is exactly the must-do photograph. So if you wanted to maybe take some photographs in front of them, that's kind of, if anyone else externally sees that, that's anatomy, you can brand yourself up with it, if that sounds all right. So we've got Anna.
Hello.
Yeah. Kitty.
Hello.
Hello. Nikki. Who, if you might notice, has the name branded. My name's Doddy Lab Coat.
Oh, brilliant.
I'm from Taiwan, so it's my Mandarin name.
So you see, there are some. We have Hattie. Helena. And then, I don't know who's hiding over the way there. Oh, Hannah's here, so I didn't mention Hannah with her back to us. Another Hannah here. Kim here. And Zara there. Is that everyone that's in the...
Yes.
Yeah, there's no hiding around that.
Right, so essentially, people have got different experiments going on. You'll see different things in terms of techniques, the way that you can look at things in the body, in cells, things that glow, things that appear on a computer screen. But really it's a chance just to hear about what kind of research is and why we do what we do.
What I do is to test a lot of compounds, new chemicals that may or may not have an effect on different models of motor neurone disease.
Kind of process them, which is what I'm doing now, is getting ready for imaging. So then we image them, and then because of the green dye, we can see their axons and see whether or not the drugs that we treat them with has made a difference to how their axons develop and whether they're helpful or not helpful, essentially.
Obviously, if you have also needed to give them another type of gene editing just so we can pull out only the motor neurons from kind of the rest of the cells.
I think we all come from very different background, and so we are able to bring something, a different vision.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think I'm definitely not at the level of some other from a molecular biology, but then I've got a better understanding of physiology and pharmacology and things like that.
My background, so I started in I did a Masters in Molecular Neuroscience, so I'm interested in cellular and molecular biology. And for me, what I think is the most exciting thing about my career or research in general is trying to figure out what causes neurons to die.
With motor neuron disease is that patients have, the first 4 or 5 decades of their life where they're using their muscles normally, their motor neurons are presumably quite healthy, and then something happens to precipitate this horrible disease, right?
Behind this trial is terrelosing that Helena just mentioned. We're going to give into a MND patient that goes to our Oxford trial sites, and then at different time point they will have the patient who enrolled in this trial will have 3 different visits at start, at 3 months later, and 6 months later.
And so basically what we do with this now is we take it over to the machine and we measure its optical density. And then, so these are our kind of standards here. So these are the ones that we know the concentrations of. And then we're just going to make all of our samples to the same amount of concentration.
Quick question. Again, loads go through our heads, so we'll try and process and try and prioritise. profile of people who have MND, it doesn't seem to be like from what we've evidenced in our lifetimes, like from late 20s onwards, early 30s. You know, Doddie's into his 40s. Doddie was the same age as me, only about 2 months younger. Yeah. So I'm so interested in that he's a high-profile sports person, and so is the other main sufferers that we are aware in the rugby community, but also football, a lot of sports. Ian, you mentioned horse riding and the horse riding community in Midlothian. So there's a real mix of people, not necessarily all sportsmen, but also just you and I, and normal people in the street as well. Is there any understanding that's come about so far in your work?
It's an excellent question. I don't have a simple answer. No. It does affect all people of every walk of life. So, this is not the case that only certain people will get it. Absolutely not the case. It is primarily a disease associated with older age. So you do see an increase in the number of people diagnosed with it as they get older, and that we've always known that. Where there's been a slightly more males than females, again, not quite sure why that, but the big change, I think, in terms of awareness has been the very high-profile sports stars that have been diagnosed with MND and have been willing to be vocal about that. And that can give a slightly false impression to the external world that it is sports stars that suffer from this. That's not the case. But there has been some links, and I think it's tenuous, but there have been some links that high performance sport might make you more at risk of developing MND. Now, I do not know if that is right or not, and I can't give you an answer as to why it is the case, if it is the case. But it's possible. It's possible that very high-end sport slightly predisposes you to MND. The first evidence for that came from Italian Serie A footballers. There was a study 20 years ago where someone said, look, Italian ex-pro footballers in Serie A in Italy got 4 or 5 times higher chance of developing MND. There's something there. And it was widely refuted as a study at the time. So it kind of came on the scene, then diminished. Years have gone by, and then I think there's been a slight reemergence. Well, is it something there? Is there something there? Certainly in cases like rugby and the like, I think there's much more primary concern around repeated concussions and head injuries and things like that, which is going to be more prevalent and common. Whether or not there's this impact on things like MND, I think the jury's out really. Either way, it's certainly there are people who are at the other extreme from someone like a Doddie who can also get MND. Yeah. So it's not the case that those people who are the fittest, the sportiest will be at one end and getting it and others won't. So being highly sedentary and not doing anything is not some kind of protective against it.
Risk mitigation.
No, so it's this kind of balancing act, but I don't think there's an answer particularly to it. It's a non-discriminating disease. It really is. It can hit people out of the blue. There are obviously cases that are genetic, and it can be passed down through families. But the vast majority of patients who get the disease, there's no known genetic cause. It's not like there's a family history of it. It's just bang, comes out of the blue and affects the individual, and that in a way makes it even harder to sometimes get your head around. It's not like other diseases where there's a history of it in the family and people have got kind of an awareness. There is some instances of ALS and MND like that, but for a lot of it, it just bang, it hits people out of the blue, and as I say, it doesn't seem to discriminate. It can affect anyone.
Are there links to other diseases that formulates into MND in some people, but they may have a history of diseases up the genetics and something else similar?
Yeah, I mean this is I think one of the things. If you ask a clinician, you probably get a different answer to me. ALS, MND is not one disease. It's probably a range of diseases that all come under one umbrella. So we know that some patients with motor neuron disease have what's called ALS with FTD, all these horrible acronyms. It's basically motor neuron disease plus FTD, which is frontotemporal dementia. And that's really a kind of Alzheimer's-like symptoms, not able to have decent memories, recall and things. And there are a proportion of ALS, MND patients that have these two diseases. So there's clearly a spectrum of diseases. They're not in isolated pigeonholes. There is overlap and blending, and some patients will have, mainly MND, but maybe an association with another condition, and that really is part of the minefield of how you pick it apart. No two patients are the same. And it's a challenge for the clinicians because giving a good prognosis of what's going to happen to me, doc, when someone gets a diagnosis is not easy. There are certain things you can use to try and second guess it. So, for example, if it starts in and around your mouth and your neck, it tends to be a more violent, for want of a better word, form of the disease than if it starts out in your hands and your fingers. It will progress faster, it'll be different.
Because we know people in our community, we're 1 in 300, working in a population of Edinburgh of 600,000. There's several thousand people with it, really.
Absolutely.
Which is just so invisible to us all, but we see different things in people in wheelchairs rapidly.
Absolutely.
So last week Sir Kevin Sinfield was up doing the 7 runs. So day 4 was Meadowbank, was Edinburgh, the Edinburgh leg. So Fourth Road Bridge to Meadowbank, and he did 4 laps round with the MD community supporters and sufferers. So you got one guy who can walk, another guy, one guy can walk, one guy who's in a wheelchair, and they're both got seen, but a different part of it,
exactly that
flavour.
Yeah. It's come back to your question earlier on, actually, that if you get MND when you're younger, it does have a tendency to be more harsh and severe. So some of the perhaps cruelest cases are really affecting the younger population. When people are perhaps more elderly and they do have an MND diagnosis, it might be nowhere near as rapid and as severe. And yes, they have weakness and they develop, but it's much, much more slow progressing. So yeah, it's not one disease with one size fits all to it. And scientifically, that's a challenge, right, as we try and study it. It's even more of a challenge when you try and do clinical trials. Because you want, for a good clinical trial, you want a patient population that is the same. So you can see how they respond to your treatment. If they're all very different from the outset, and you've got no idea of what they normally would have progressed like, it's very difficult to tell whether your drug's working or not. So these are the kind of challenges that are facing us.
Moving target constantly.
So we've got 4 numbers on our name.
Yeah.
Pointing at, so that's 4 rugby players. With Dottie being obviously number 5, so we've got a big 5 in our back.
Yeah.
That's our key contact into that. Ian can tell us the other numbers.
What are
7.
numbers?
1, 4, 5, 7. Is it?
1, 4, 5, 7. One was Paul Rendell, who played rugby down at Wasps.
Right.
Played for England.
Yeah.
He died of MND. 4 is Ed Slater, who plays for Gloucester.
Yeah.
7 was obviously Rob Burrows, and 5 was Doddy. So that's the reason we've got numbers in the spelling of our Doddy's Grand Slam run. So we're just trying to put everybody in there. But and they probably all are completely different as well when you look at them.
Absolutely.
We saw Ed Slater last year. I had the pleasure of meeting Ed Slater last year with Princess Anne.
Yeah.
He was the one that was feeling really humbled because we'd actually gone to see him, but actually it was the other way around. We just couldn't believe that we'd been allowed to go and meet him and his family.
Yeah.
I think he's had a bit of a kind of fast. It's gone downhill pretty rapidly in the last 12 months. So it's just about us making that difference. We talked about before. Michael's talked about some of these cases. We've seen some of them coming on really fast. My wife's next door neighbour for many years. He took ill when he was about 72, 73. Didn't know what was wrong with him. He was still mobile.
Yeah.
Didn't have any really serious debilitating effects. But he passed away and was diagnosed with having MND. That's what had gone wrong with him for the last couple of years of his life. Never played sport.
Yep.
Never smoked a cigarette. Never done anything overly strenuous.
Yep.
Worked for the council. His family laughed about that. He worked for the council. Didn't really do anything. Didn't push the boat out. But we can have a wee chuckle. But just what you said. Different walks of life,
isn't it?
And just different symptoms. And Kevin's mum, who's in our team, she was the same. She had asthma and COPD for years. And it had affected her breathing, but it wasn't until her very latter years that they realised it was actually something else that was going on. It was MND too. So
and that's the reality of it, and it affects everyone differently, but it affects them. That's the bottom line. It's affecting people's quality of life. Even for those people with a milder form of the disease, it can be a real kind of negative aspect of everything they do. If you're not as fit as you want to be, as mobile as you want to be, it's gonna change your quality of life.
Is it I'll take that back. Is it more easier to diagnose now with your technology, or?
By experts, yes, but so experts are really now the best neurologists, and they are some of the brightest minds in the country, will absolutely be able to diagnose an MND case if put in front of them. But it's a clinical diagnosis. At the minute, there's not a kind of a blood test or something that you would do that would say yes or no. It's a multi kind of factorial decision that an expert clinician makes. The challenge we've got, and this is a big problem, is that now it takes too long to get the patient in front of the expert neurologist, because things like GPs are not well enough knowledgeable of the signs to refer quickly. So it might be the same, the lady you're talking about, actually, well, she just difficulty breathing a bit, or do you know what, just a bit of weakness in the arm, and we'll come back in a few weeks, and we'll get you some physio, and actually, one of the big things I think we're going to need to change in the whole area of the disease is an awareness of these non-specialist clinicians to say, I suspect it, and get you referred very quickly. And then if you put in front of the expert can say pretty sharpish, yay or nay, but you've got to have the expert doing it. So it's not an easy disease to diagnose, and historically it was always like the last one that was left. It was almost you ruled everything out first, and then you were left with an MND diagnosis. Now the really expert neurologists are able to be much quicker about, so actually I think this is MND, and they've got some tests and things they can do. But it's a difficult diagnosis to make. So
it's not like the MS where you'll see markers or lesions within an X-ray or a scan or something.
Exactly, yes. So for MS, you're into an MRI scanner and you're looking for lesions in white matter, it's called, of the nervous system. I mean, even then, there's still an awful lot of ifs, buts and maybes. But with MND, there's nothing that obvious. There's not a real clear signal. Yeah, and with it being different, someone might come in and, Ewan MacDonald, the gentleman here who has MND, that's their family donated to our centre, so Ewan MacDonald Centre.
Yeah, I used to play rugby with his dad.
Sorry, again?
I used to play rugby with his dad.
Ah, so Ewan Donald, right.
Yeah.
So his problem was he couldn't change a gear on his bike. He was, just with the gear shifters, so he was cycling to work one day and realised he didn't have the power to actually change the gear. Other people, it will be that they find they're falling over a bit because they get what's called foot drop. The foot doesn't quite lift off the floor properly, they just catch on a pavement or something. So again, you go to a GP, they're two very, very different things. You wouldn't necessarily think they were the same disease. Someone that comes having a bit of trouble swallowing, or the reality is they are all potentially MND. So it's got to be a real expert that can do the whole body neurological exam and then work out all the different bits of the jigsaw to give a diagnosis. So it really is a disease where we need experts to be making that reference. So it's not as quick as it should be, but when you are in front of the right people now, they are much better than they've ever been at saying yay or nay. I think makes a difference.
Where are these experts coming from? Because clearly, if there's
the clinicians or the scientists,
those making the decision, the diagnosis.
The diagnosis, the clinicians. So they are coming through the kind of cadres of medical students that will be trained in general medicine, will then often choose to specialise in neurology, and then it's a subspecialty of neurology.
Okay.
So some of them working in neurology will have that as, actually I'm really interested in that, and that's an area they will then move into. Again, this is where things like awareness count. You might think this is silly, but actually, there will be some student right now, probably sitting studying away somewhere, who may say, actually, do you know what, I really fancy committing some of my career to MND. And it will be because it's at the forefront of their mind because they've seen Doddy on the news, or they've seen the news around your cycle rides, or they've seen Kevin doing his role. That can be enough just to make someone think, do you know what, that would be a worthwhile thing to do.
Purpose.
This is something that we're doing as a team as well, so we're doing engagement, awareness throughout our challenge, which probably sets us apart from the other teams taking part. So we'll speak to schools before we go, while we're there. We're putting together an education pack, which will take in lots of aspects and the awareness of MND.
Brilliant.
And it is to inspire kids of what they can do with their lives, working as a team to make things happen and to cure things and to change the world, basically.
Yeah. But you have to do this because these same kids and students, they're thinking, well, I could go and I might even do anything medical, or as a scientist, I might think, actually, I'm going to go and do physics, or I want to work with Elon Musk on his next. That might, that they see that, they get excited by it. You've got to see it to want to be aware of it, to want to engage with it. And what's, my job is to try and recruit bright people to want to work on MND. And it's a competition. I'm competing for the best people, the best minds, with people that want to work on cancer, on whatever else. And so that kind of thing, honestly, it might not pay an immediate dividend. You might think, okay, we're going into a school, what's that going to do? Do you know, Mo, in 20 years' time, one kid sitting in that room might have been inspired to become clinician, scientist, and they make that big breakthrough. And if you hadn't been in there doing that, they wouldn't have ever happened. That's the reality of it. And we often forget that.
And that goes back to what you said about Doddy said, it's not for him, but in 20 years' time, if one person benefits, that may be from that one kid sitting there and going, I want to do this.
Absolutely. I can help, I want to help.
Yeah.
Even if it's because it's never one person's going to do everything. But we all, the proverbial standing on the shoulders of giants, right? That everyone tries to stand on the generations that went before and do a little bit more themselves. And that's what happens. If you put the good people together with the funding, with the ideas, with the resources, you can make change. But if you don't have any of those individual elements to it, the whole thing falls down. And people is a big part of that whole thing. If you don't inspire people, if you don't get people realising this is a genuine thing they could get involved with, then why would they? You wouldn't, would you? When you're thinking about, when you remember back when you're 16 thinking about what you're going to do with your life, wouldn't even be on your radar.
You're not finding this in the Clears Library at school.
Exactly. But imagine if you tell people, look, this is the reality of it, and you could do something. Whether it's as a nurse, whether it's as someone working in a research lab like mine, whether it's as a doctor, whether it's a fundraiser, whether it's working for admin for a charity it doesn't matter. All these people are needed. And so the awareness part, I think, is so critical, really. I don't think you're probably even aware of the impact it might have on the field. Even if you just convert one person to stop and think about it, wow, that could change people's lives. So, yeah,
That's superb.